spoke about the responsibilities of Canadian citizens, but those responsibilities include things like paying taxes to pay for services like health care. This bill goes well beyond closing a loophole for a small group of people, which previous Conservative legislation and Conservatives supported. By contrast, the PBO estimated that this bill would grant citizenship to over 100,000 people in 5 years. There are no security vetting requirements for persons who fall under this bill, and this bill contains no consecutive residency requirements. And failing that, the bill contains no requirements for people without consecutive residency for any mechanism like, let's say, paying taxes. Why would the minister, knowing all the testimony that happened in the last Parliament on this particular issue, continue to devalue Canadian citizenship in this way?
The Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Allow me, first of all, as we start to debate on the bill, to take a moment to thank again the stakeholders across the country, including Don Chapman, who's the head of the Lost Canadian, who was a tireless advocate and advocated for this. Let me also clarify the record again, and I look forward to the committee on this, but the majority of lost Canadian cases were remedied by the legislative amendments that were implemented in 2009 and 2015, with approximately 20,000 at the time acquiring citizenship. So we know historically that not everyone is going to apply through this. We are here again to right a wrong, and there is a constitutional in front of us that we have no choice but to enact legislation.
So about C3. This is recycled legislation, as the Minister just pointed out, previously tabled as C-71 in the previous Parliament. And actually C-71 was retread legislation of S-245 that was heavily amended, a private member's bill that was heavily amended by the government with the help of the former party that used to exist in this place called the New Democratic Party. The Conservatives supported it then, and we opposed it then, and we continue to have significant issues with this bill. There's three major parts to this bill. The first is citizenship by descent. The second is a provision for adopted children, and the third is fixing a problem with lost Canadians. That's an issue in the current legislation. So Conservatives can't support this in its current form, and the main reason is the citizenship by descent. The bill dilutes the integrity of Canadian citizenship by automatically extending it to multiple generations born abroad with only a minimal connection to Canada. And this is a classic Liberal solution to a problem. We have a problem, as the Minister pointed out, and I'll speak to in a bit about a court case, and there's reasons why this needs to be done, but the fix that the Liberals come up with is a poor one. It's a bad one. It doesn't really solve the problem in an adequate way. Conservatives will introduce amendments at committee. As Andrew Griffith from Policy Options said, Canadian citizenship is a precious gift. At the committee stage, members of Parliament must be able to fulsomely examine the implications of an open-ended residency requirement, and we will do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I first want to speak about the citizenship by descent, why it's problematic and why we will vote against. So, for some background, how did we get here? Well, prior to 2009, it was possible for Canadian citizens to pass on their citizenship to endless generations born outside of Canada. They you didn't have to have much of a connection to Canada. You could never live in Canada, but yet you could pass on that citizenship over and over, generation after generation. And something happened in the mid-2000s, and it was a crisis in Lebanon. And many Lebanese Canadians were concerned about the safety and situation going on in Beirut, and so they made sure that they had passed their citizenship on to their children. And when things got really, really difficult in Beirut, they called on the Canadian government to rescue them. And so the Canadian government spent, in 2006, the Canadian government spent $94 million bringing about 15,000 Lebanese Canadians to Canada. Now these were Canadian citizens, but for the most part had rarely or never lived in Canada. And so these people benefited from citizenship with minimal connection to Canada, and they became known as the Canadians of convenience. And interestingly, what happened was a lot of these people were rescued from Beirut. They came to Canada for a bit, and many of them returned right back to Lebanon and that was it for their connection to Canada. But it cost us Canadian taxpayers $94 million. And this led to a bill by the Harper government to create what was known as the first generation rule. So after 2009, the rule changed so that a citizen born outside of Canada could pass their citizenship to their child born outside of Canada for one generation, but the next generation born outside of Canada was not automatically a citizen. And that was called the first generation limit, and this bill now effectively abolishes that rule and allows people to transfer or confer citizenship on their children generation after generation after generation for one measly requirement of spending 1,095 days in Canada, which I'll talk about a little bit more. All you have to do to meet the requirements is have a few years in Canada. So why are we doing this now? Well, in 2023, the Ontario Superior Court ruled that this first generation law or rule was unconstitutional. So the Liberal government in their great wisdom chose not to appeal it, but to just accept it, to accept that ruling. They could have appealed it to a higher court and they chose not to, and they committed to changing the law. The court did say, though, that it was reasonable to apply a substantial connection test. They understood you can't just give citizenship out like candy. There has to be some sort of a connection to Canada. And so they said, if you put in some sort of a substantial connection test, that would be okay according to the law. So this Liberal government chose to create a substantial connection test that is not substantial at all. This test, it's 1,095 days, which is about 3 years. You have to spend that much time in Canada prior to the birth of a child. It's not consecutive days. It could be a month here, a month there. And 3 years is very weak. It is, the government doesn't even know, really, if you've been in Canada for that time. It's an affidavit that a person signs. So it's a very weak way to commit to being a Canadian citizen and then to confer that citizenship onto your children. It's not a real test of commitment because those days don't have to be consecutive. The other issue in this is that there's no criminal background check at all. And so once again, we could be passing on citizenship to children who potentially could have serious convictions, they could have serious criminal background, but yet we wouldn't even know because we don't even check. Even though when we have newcomers coming to our country, the government puts a lot of effort into checking the security background of those people, and it can take up to a year or longer for newcomers to actually get processed through security. So Andrew Griffith from Policy Options said, to remedy the issue, Bill C-71, speaking about the previous legislation, uses residency as a substantial connection test. However, the new standard in Bill C-71, which requires a foreign-born Canadian to have spent a total of 1,095 days in Canada, differs significantly from what is required of new Canadians. The government has failed to fully consider the implications of such an open-ended condition. And I might note, Mr. Speaker, that in the US, you can only confer citizenship to the first generation, and you have to have at least 5 years in the US, with 2 of those years being after the age of 14. There's also very strict screening. In the UK, it's only the first generation that can be admitted into Canada. So there are some very strict rules in our partner countries that the Liberal government here has chosen not to enforce, creating this extremely weak connection test. Which brings up a question. What does it mean to be a citizen? And I believe this bill cheapens that. There's an organization called the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. They do great work on this subject of citizenship, and they help a lot of newcomers in our country. And Daniel Bernhard, who's the CEO, said this: the sense of belonging is very powerful. If people don't consider Canada to be their society, then they won't dedicate themselves to it or get involved in our culture and contribute their utmost to making our society a success. That's the danger of concern to all of us. We must roll up our sleeves to restore the value of being Canadian. So citizenship is a connection to your home country. It's being there for your country in times that are good and bad. You know, it's enjoying the peace of Canada. It's proudly participating in wars when necessary, being available for keeping the peace at other times. Also, you need to understand the current situation in our country. You need to live here to understand how things are. You know, some of the issues we have right now in our country with crime, with an epidemic of crime, with expensive and unavailable housing, with difficulties in healthcare, trying to find doctors and waiting lists, with high taxes. We have a drug crisis, including fentanyl in our country right now. And you don't know that if you're living in another country. It's also important to understand our history and be proud of our accomplishments. Be proud of our sports teams. even though some people may cheer for sports teams outside of Canada. Nobody does that, right? But we need to be proud of our teams, proud of the beauty that's in our country, believing in our Canadian values and norms, democracy, equality, not engaging in religious squabbles and wars. You know, so many people come to our country from other countries, and they bring their culture, they bring their food, they bring all the good parts of their countries, and it's often they are escaping bad situations. They're escaping war, they're escaping fighting, and we don't need to bring those wars to Canada. We can bring the good parts of it and build a country and a society that works for us here. And people that come here enjoy our social safety net. But it's so important that you participate by paying taxes to enjoy that social safety net. It's something that Canada is proud of. We take great care of our people, but there's a cost to that, and it's very unfair when people who have never had any participation in our tax system then expect to receive benefits from that. Canadians proudly display our Canadian flag on Canada Day, and of course, are allowed to vote in elections to decide governments. In 2010, one of our best immigration ministers ever said, Jason Kenney said the following: "Citizenship is about more, far more than a right to carry a passport or to vote. It defines who we are as Canadians, including our mutual responsibilities to one another and a shared commitment to the values that are rooted in our history, like freedom, unity, and loyalty. That's why we must protect the values of Canadian citizenship and must take steps against those who would cheapen it." And I think this legislation actually cheapens it. The Liberals have worked hard to cheapen what it means to be a Canadian citizen. And I point to the comments made by the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, about Canada being a post-national country and how citizenship and being Canada just doesn't mean much other than the borders around us. And you just have to look at the passport to see that, and the way that this Liberal government changed the passport to take away all the symbols that mean anything and replace it with meaningless pictures and things that don't mean anything and don't provide any sense of what it means to be Canadian. It's just a small example of the way that this government has been moving to cheapen citizenship, and I believe this bill just adds further to that. One of the big concerns also that I have in this is this uncontrolled citizenship expansion that will be allowed through this bill. So Ken Nicol-Lane, who's an immigration consultant for the Times of India, said this: "This announcement, at least on initial reading, looks like it will open up the chain of citizenship without end." And he's completely correct about that. When this issue under the previous legislation was at Immigration Committee in the previous Parliament, we asked many questions to the IRCC department officials about how many people would receive citizenship under these provisions. And they could not answer the question. They would not answer the question. We asked repeatedly, we asked in many different ways. They never answered the question. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer did actually do a study on this bill, on Bill C-71 in the last Parliament, and they estimated that it would create at least 115,000 new citizens in the first 5 years, most of them living abroad. And of course, that number can then double every generation, right? So we could end up with a lot of new citizens who really have minimal connection to Canada and just don't ever actually participate in anything in Canada. Andrew Griffith from Policy Options said there are an estimated 4 million Canadians living outside of Canada, and about half of them are born abroad. And so we have to be very careful that we don't add to our burdens by bringing in Canadians, by giving citizenship to people who don't participate in Canada at all. It's just no surprise that the government can't answer questions about numbers. And those who were here last week might recall when we were questioning the minister on the estimates, we asked all kinds of questions about really key marquee policy items. You know, like one of the marquee policies of the Liberal government is to reduce non-permanent residents. And I was asking the minister about these numbers, and she didn't have any clue about what they were. Another marquee policy is reducing the population this year. The overall population is projected by the government to drop by 500,000 people, and it hasn't dropped at all yet. Yet the minister seems to have no knowledge of that. So it doesn't surprise me that the minister and the department has no clue about how many people this legislation will impact. I think that's really critical to know how this legislation is going to impact Canada. Because another issue that goes along with that is the cost. How much is this going to cost taxpayers to have this legislation? Well, again, IRCC officials had no clue. They did not have an answer to that. Apparently, they hadn't looked into this at all. But the Parliamentary Budget Officer did, and estimated it would be about $21 million in admin costs over 5 years. That's to process additional claims for citizenship, passports, and applicants to social programs. And by the way, if 115,000 people started getting old age security at age 65, if these people actually came and lived in Canada and collected that old age security, that's $1 billion a year. So the potential for cost to the Canadian taxpayer is very, very huge here. We can't underestimate that. And Andrew Griffith again, he said, IRCC needs to determine and share estimates for the approximate number of new citizens expected under the change, along with the incremental workload and resources that are required before this bill goes to committee. And I would echo that. We need to know those numbers so that we can properly study it. So to summarize citizenship by descent, it removes that first generation limit and allows citizenship to be conferred generation after generation after generation after generation with a simple, weak, substantial connection test of 1,095 non-consecutive days in Canada. And there is no criminal background check at all required with this. And so for those reasons, we cannot support it. Now there is a second provision in this bill, and that is the provision for adopted children. Currently, if you adopt a child from abroad, you have to, once the adoption is completed, you have to go through the process of applying for permanent residency like anyone else would, and it takes a long time. There's a lot of costs involved and legal costs, and it can be a stressful time for a new family. And so what this bill does essentially is it treats an adopted child from abroad as if they were born in Canada. So once the adoption is finalized, that child is given Canadian citizenship. We support that. We support equal treatment for adopted children. We've done that in the past, and we will continue to support that. It makes sense. It's a common sense change so that parents aren't penalized for adopting children from overseas, but they in fact can be treated in the same manner as if they were born in Canada. And I spoke to this in the previous Parliament when this came up at committee, and the chair well knows that we supported this, and we would support this provision if it were by itself. The third part of this legislation is restoring lost Canadians. This part also is reasonable, and when it came to committee, we were supportive of this. And essentially, this means that the easiest way to understand this is that immigration and citizenship law is very complicated. And when changes are made over the years, sometimes there are unintended consequences. And so that's what happened here. And there was a group of people born within a 4-year stretch from 1977 to 81, I believe it was. And they had to apply for citizenship, actually, by the age of 28, and if they didn't, they lost it. And so that was never the intention of the law. It just was a kind of a glitch that ended up there because of the way the laws were amended over the years. And so this does need to be fixed because nobody should lose their citizenship. In many cases, actually from Yona Martin, a senator, brought this forward, in fact, in a bill S-245, and she said many of these individuals were raised in Canada from a young age. Though they were born abroad, some of them came to Canada at a young age as infants in some cases. They went to school in Canada, they raised their families in Canada, they worked and paid taxes in Canada, and yet they turned 28 without knowing that their citizenship would be stripped from them because of a change in the policy in 1977 that required Canadians to apply to retain their citizenship when they turned 28. So that's the essence of what this piece of the bill does. It fixes a problem that came about because of unintended consequences. This bill was I have to say, it was brought in by Senator Martin, and it was intended to just fix this issue because many have tried to fix it and nobody has succeeded. Unfortunately, when it came to committee, the Liberal government, with the help of the former party that used to exist in this place, the New Democrats, they actually ganged up on Senator Martin's bill, private member's bill, and they made substantial changes to it to incorporate these things like citizenship by descent. And it was, I think, a very unfair thing to do, to have a private member's bill commandeered by the government with the help of NDP members, and but yet that's what happened. And so that bill didn't make it forward. But it's a reminder in this House that we need to respect certain things, and private members' bills are something that really does need to be respected. So, Mr. Speaker, to summarize this bill, there are elements of this bill that we support, as I mentioned. We support the elements dealing with adoption and with the lost Canadians, but we cannot support citizenship by descent for endless generations. We cannot allow endless generations to have a very weak connection to Canada and still get their citizenship conferred. We can't stand by and not have a background check. And we have to be very careful that we don't create new unintended consequences as has happened in the past. And I must remind everyone that the Liberals broke our immigration system. For years, Canadians agreed on immigration. We brought in skilled labor to fill gaps in our labor force. We helped displaced and poorly treated people from all over the world find a new home in Canada. We had a balanced, reasonable, and fair policy for immigrants, and it was good for our economy and it was good for Canada. But then the Liberals blew it up. They opened the floodgates, they brought in millions of people, they jammed up the bureaucracy, so files now take years to process, and too many cases led to mistakes. Like last year, a father and son were given a security clearance, even though there was a video from 2015 that showed them violently participating in things. And they were actually planning a terror plot. So mistakes happen because of jammed up systems. And let's be clear, it's not the fault of newcomers to our country. Clearly, it's the fault of the government. Immigrants were just doing what the Liberal government asked them to do. They had no idea they were coming to a country that was not prepared for them. And so this left all Canadians dealing with housing shortages, sky-high job shortages, healthcare problems, etc. So Conservatives believe in strong, fair immigration, citizenship rules.
Speaker, I obviously have had lots of opportunity to work with the member opposite on this specific legislation when he came in the House in the last Parliament. And I remember when we actually were able to pass it and commit it to families across Canada. Some were our constituents, and we told them that we were committed to making sure that we were not going to have their children lose their citizenship, and that they were not going to be part of the list of lost Canadians. And I remember, if my memory serves me correctly, the member opposite did support this. What changed?
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member is speaking about lost Canadians and the people that should not lose their citizenship. And yes, we supported that. I supported that in the previous Parliament. And that was the whole purpose of the Senator's Bill S-245, was to fix that problem. And it was a simple bill that came forward, but then that member and her party, along with members of the NDP, hijacked that bill, and they added a whole bunch of things to that private member's bill. They changed it far beyond what was originally intended. And in fact, the purpose of making it really simple and easy to digest about the lost Canadians was to actually get it through the process, because many had failed before. And that was the whole point of it. Let's make it simple, let's get it through. And yet that member and the Liberal government complicated it, they added to it, they hijacked the bill, and made it something that was bad for Canadians and something that we could not support.
The amendments that needs to be made to this bill, which would prevent endless chain migration, which the bill currently provides for without any sort of consecutive residency requirement, is amending the bill to ensure that those who this bill would apply to have to spend some sort of substantive length of time in Canada over in a consecutive manner. The bill doesn't apply to that right now. Right now, somebody ad infinity descendants could just apply for citizenship after having spent 1,000 days in Canada over the course of their lifetime and then claim health care benefits. Does the member agree that there should be a consecutive residency requirement of some nature in this bill?
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you. I thank the member for the question. Absolutely. And that's one of the key things. And if we look at some of the other countries, we see that they have much more stringent requirements. And so I think that having at least a consecutive requirement, and even 3 years in my mind isn't enough. We look at the U.S. example where they have a 5-year requirement, and 2 of those years have to be after the age of 14. I think we can look at our peer countries and find many good examples of how to make a more substantial connection test, and having consecutive days is key to that.
Resuming debate.